Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the American Kestrel and Falconry, or Fundamentals of Flying American Kestrels with Matt Mullenix. I'm Daniel Olson. I'm a friend of Mark's, and he's asked me to help on the technical side here, but I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and so he can instruct us, give us a little bit more information about flying Kestrels in American Falconry. Matt, welcome to the presentation.
Hey, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining in today. I'm Matt Mullenix. I'm calling from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Unfortunately, my camera is not working this morning, so we'll just have to do without that component. But a little bit about me. So I've been a falconer since about 1984, and for about 10 years in the 90s, I flew really nothing but Kestrels, one after the other, a few for several seasons, and kind of made it a specialty. And out of that experience came American Kestrels and Modern Falconry, the book that some of you all have. And it's funny, I flew my first Kestrel again this spring after 20 years. My kids became twin girls, and in the intermediate time had not had a Kestrel, had been flying male Harris Hawks. So I wanted to make sure that I could still do it, and I had to look at my own book and start going through the pages again and relearn how to do it. But it's like riding a bike. So well, you're going to find out why I'm a writer and not a speaker as we go forward. I wanted to let everybody know that that this is going to be kind of an overview. If you've got, let's move on to the next slide. There we go. Hope everybody can see this next slide. These are 4 falconry fundamentals in American Kestrels and Modern Falconry. If you have these, or one, you've got all of the details that I think you're going to need to succeed, to catch game with the American Kestrels. This presentation will be more of an overview of the basic concepts and some photographs and videos that I took while flying this Kestrel in the spring as kind of a refresher. A haggard female named Cece, and so she's featured in this. We'll run through these slides, and I'll point out some of the things that I think are the most important to watch out for. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. We'll open it up, and you guys can ask as many questions as you like. So any points that I miss along the way, just jot them down and ask me at the end. All right. So as I said, with these 2 books here, you've got all the details. I mean, it's everything that I know certainly about Kestrels, and with the new book, 4 Falconry Fundamentals, the basic rubric that I use to catch game and have relied on for 35 years, and this is what it looks like. So where this little diagram came from is from years of having conversations with people on the phone. You put a book out, and then people start to call, and what that gives you is an opportunity to really hear from a lot of people all over the country and all over the world. And you start to see some commonalities in what they experience in falconry and the problems that they have. And one of the ways that I describe it is, the problem that they may have is it's never going to be the width of the flange on the jess. I mean, that doesn't keep anybody from catching game, right? So the granular details really change from falconer to falconer, from sponsor to sponsor, from country to country. But there are some basic fundamentals, I call them, and those things never change. And there's at least 4. Without these major considerations, falconry just doesn't work. The whole thing falls apart. So just to go around the clock face there, prey base, number 1 concern. It's it's not about what type of hawk you're flying, even though most of us, sort of our falconry revolves around which kind of hawk we want and what kind of hawk we want next. We're all in love with the hawks, and that's perfectly fine. But if you start there, you're missing the first fundamental, and that's the first and the largest mistake a lot of people make. You have to make your falconry revolve around the prey base. And so what do you have to hunt, and what do you have a lot of? Prey base, and each of these fundamentals will have a couple of things that I call sort of prerequisites. These are facets of the fundamental that need to be there. And although we could go on forever with each of these, and I could have an individual conversation with each of you, and you all could come up with probably more. These are things that I feel like are essential. And so for prey base, it's got to be a suitable prey, it's got to be abundant, it's got to be accessible, and it has to be at home, which is a concept that I use to describe basically wild game, as opposed to bag game, as opposed to some highly artificial scenarios that people come up with. Essentially, you want it to be fair play, and so that's important. So if you meet those, and then you've got a good prey base, then you can make the rest of the decisions based on your locale. So husbandry, next big concern, and in terms of catching game, although husbandry, we talk about it forever, the housing and the equipment and the perches, hooding, there's a million little sub arts to falconry, but essentially, if you want to catch game, you gotta take care of the feathers, you gotta take care of the feet, you have to have good food and good furniture, and the furniture really just needs to protect the feathers and the feet. And so when people have major problems, again, it's not how wide you made the flanges, it's whether or not you've got a hole in the bird's leg. These are the big problems, especially with kestrels. Recall is more than just getting the bird back, but it's the first question I ask when we get there is like, hey, can you get it back? Because when you're talking to somebody and they're saying that they can't get their kestrel in position, or they're struggling to make into it, you find out that it really doesn't even come back reliably. And this idea of recall is really, for me, more expansive. It has to do with how well the bird, any bird in falconry, understands the program. Like, does it know what its job is, right? And so we'll get into that a little bit more. And then slip management. Finally, this is about finding advantage. This is the whole ball of wax. This is when you have the hawk that's trained. It's got good recall. You've figured out the husbandry. You know what prey base you're after. Now you have to put the hawk in some position of advantage, and you have to limit the ability of the prey to escape. I mean, those are the two, sort of competing interests there. You have to, expand the opportunity for the hawk and reduce the opportunity for the prey. And within that, concepts like, is it a pursuit flight or an ambush, and what to do about reflushes. These are basic, but they're essential. And with kestrels in particular, we look at ambushes because, frankly, car hawking is an ambush. And it's mostly what most of us do with kestrels. It's not the only thing they can do, but it's certainly important to think about that you're setting up an ambush in that case. So that's the fundamentals. We'll get a little bit now into each of them. And so this is the prey base. These are the prerequisites. Is it suitable, abundant, at home, accessible? And while the books drill down into each of these. There are essentially several questions to ask. Under suitability, is it a natural prey? Is it well matched to the hawk? Is it something that they catch in the wild? Is it something they can handle? Is it something they like to eat? Is it something that they find where they are? Something that they respond immediately to? These are all suitable prey items. And you can find that out by looking through the books, looking at the natural history, and then talking to other falconers about what they actually catch, generally with their birds. And I mentioned suitability because a lot of people will get a hawk for some outsized prey. They want to hawk jackrabbits with a Tiercel Harris, for example, which you certainly can do, and some of them are great at it. But if you have jacks and you're going to hunt jacks, then maybe a female is a better choice. Something that they can handle well. Abundance. Are there enough of them to provide frequent slips? This is where a lot of falconers make probably their largest mistake in terms of assessing their local prey base, because they especially before you have really had a lot of experience hunting, you don't know how many you need, and the truth is you need a lot of slips. And with the kestrel, just thinking on it this morning, even with the kestrel that's already trained and catching, you want a dozen really good slips, for every catch, and that is because not only do you have to factor in the possibility that it misses, but also is there traffic concerns or the slip disintegrates. You really need more than one. You can't be looking all day for one slip and expect to be successful. At home, so does the prey have a chance? Is this really hunting? These are considerations that are probably more important for other types of hawks, frankly, besides kestrels. Just from, and we'll get into it a little bit more, just from the perspective that that the kestrels need so much advantage that you're using all your tools to put prey in their feet. And so for example, flying starlings out the car window, certainly fair with the kestrel, maybe not so fair with a Harris hawk, and something to consider. Accessible. So is the prey legal? Is it nearby? Do you actually have it? Do you have to drive an hour to find it, or 2 hours, or and do you have permission where you are? So these are important points to make about the prey base. Assuming you have all of that, we'll talk a little bit about what you're going to hunt with a kestrel. So obviously this is a starling, a European starling. It's a non-native species. They are about 70 grams, 80 grams, large one, which is most of the kestrel's weight, American kestrel's weight. Most kestrels can't carry them, which is handy, because a lot of kestrels will give you that challenge, but they can handle them very well. They're suitable, they're abundant, they're always at home, everywhere you look. And they're generally accessible to everybody across the country. So starlings are your meat and potatoes. House sparrow, really right up there with the starling, and for a lot of the same reasons, because it's non-native. You have a lot more opportunity at them. You can, both of these birds you can hunt in the city, which really just sort of widens the availability of the sport for everybody. Part of the difference between these two from a falconer standpoint is that the starling is one that doesn't put in, and we'll talk about that later in slip management. But it's important to know that some birds put in and some birds don't, and that's true of all quarry. So if you think about all the quarry, the hundreds of species that falconers chase around the world, there's really only two kinds: the ones that put in to cover when they're chased, and ones that don't. And each of those strategies requires a different approach. Starlings, they take off for the sky; they don't put in. House sparrows are good flyers, but they generally will put in if they're under pressure. And so that we'll talk a little bit about how to take advantage of that. This is a brown-headed cowbird, and I put it here because it's a great little quarry for kestrels. And I would say all of the icterids, the American blackbirds, fall pretty much in this category. They are legal to hunt in Louisiana for sure. We've actually got a season on blackbirds. In most places, they are a depredating bird, and you don't need a special permit to catch one. They're highly variable in size. Cowbirds are really not that much bigger than house sparrows, even though they look larger. They don't weigh anymore. But the boat-tailed grackle, for example, that you see in coastal Texas, is a giant bird, frankly, especially relative to a kestrel, although kestrels can handle them with some assistance. So blackbirds are great. There's a number of different ways you can fly them. This is a Sora rail. Soras are great quarry for a lot of types of hawks. I've actually never caught one with a kestrel, but I've never taken a kestrel out where we could catch one. So, but I know they can be caught. I hunt them regularly with other birds, and although it's a fairly good sized bird, maybe 100 grams, 110 grams, they come up out of the ground and they put back in. They're good quarry, and kestrels do like them. This is a mourning dove, obviously, a difficult quarry. I've kind of put these in order of utility for us. A lot of people will get a kestrel and say, "Oh, I'd like to hunt doves with it." As a game bird, it's not legal to fly them from a vehicle. So that's something to consider. It leaves you with actually very few options for catching them, except maybe off the fist in a low sort of ambush flight, which it turns out there's just not that many opportunities to do. But they do catch them. They can catch them. Their feet generally come up with a bunch of feathers, because all the feathers come off a mourning dove. But in the wild, kestrels do catch them. I've seen several mourning doves caught with kestrels, and have caught them myself with my own birds. Again, starlings and house sparrows are going to be your main quarry. And finally, I've got a little cotton rat in here. I know that some people are interested to hunt small rodents. Certainly, as food value, it's fantastic. You can't get better for a kestrel than mice and small rats. They certainly can catch them. I haven't done a lot of this myself, but I know some places out west where you could make a little sport of it. So add that in there. For me, starlings and house sparrows and some blackbirds, and you don't need to go much further than that. All right, so next, fundamental husbandry, and here we've got the four basic concerns: feathers here, feet, food, and furniture. So these considerations, if you can check all the boxes and you've got no major problems with any of them, then you can pretty well assure yourself that this is not a problem between you and catching game. Again, feathers, feet, food, and furniture, the four main things you have to worry about with husbandry, even though, husbandry is a giant subject that really there's no end to talking about it. From a falconer standpoint, of successful falconry, these are where you have to really nail these down. So feathers. I put this slide in. This is Cece on the day I trapped her and the day I let her go, or some day after. I actually followed her around for about a week. She set up shop near the house and in a big field and stayed with us for a little while. But I put this slide in to represent, the moment you have to start worrying about feathers and the moment you don't have to worry about feathers anymore. And that's basically, every second you got the bird. And that's true of every husbandry consideration. So it never stops. It starts right there. You can pull a feather, when you're taking it off the trap, and and not get it back during the season. So you have to start watching out immediately. Fortunately, kestrels have tough feathers. So this slide illustrates what kestrels use their feathers for. This is a male kestrel, obviously about to bring some prey to his young. Like woodpeckers, they jam that tail against the tree and they use it as a brace. Their long wing feathers, primaries must get bent quite a bit navigating these holes, and yet you rarely see any wild kestrel, any wild hawk, generally speaking, with broken feathers. There's two things about the feathers. There's the fact that they're intact, and you can see he's got no broken feathers, but also the quality of the feather. And those are your two main concerns there. Do you have a whole feather? Is it broken? But also, and we don't pay much attention to this, what is the quality of the feather? Does it have a nice sheen to it? Does it lay one on top of the other? Does the bird preen often? Is the coat of feathers that the bird has, is it working as a coat of feathers? Or do you have basically a feather duster on a perch? And you can see really even with one photograph, and you see this a lot with even good falconers whose kestrels are catching game regularly, but who are maybe have the bird a little too low, or they're flying it a little bit too hard, or they're doing something a little bit too much, and the bird does not have enough downtime to preen and keep itself in good shape. And while it's catching and successful in that sense, you can tell that it's not taking care of itself, and that will eventually. Oh, okay. Sorry to interrupt. Can you admit a few more people in the waiting room? Oh, sure, absolutely. Hope they have not been waiting long. Okay, I'm adding. Okay, we got 24 now. Welcome to the people who came in. Sorry to start without you. Hope everybody's well. We've talked a little bit about about the fundamentals for falconry fundamentals, and we're going through them with regard to American Kestrels, and we're here at Husbandry now, and particularly talking about feathers. So. So again, you're with American Kestrel, you're dealing with a bird that has good, tough feathers to begin with, which is great, and then it's up to you to make sure that they don't get any worse. All right, so this is Cece, the bird I had this spring. This is as bad as her feathers got, and this is how it starts. So if you can see that picture there, a little primary feather with almost a tip off of it, and the way this probably happened in the box because when I was first putting her in the box, she'd kind of fram around in there. That's pretty common. This I was able to fix just with some warm water, and it came back out, did not break for the rest of the time I had her. But that's kind of how granular you have to be. You have to look at the tips every time you pull the bird on the fist. Look at the tail tips, look at the wing tips. If there's any irregularity, as you can see here, very typical, you've got to fix whatever is wrong with your husbandry, right? Or get the bird through whatever training hang up you're at that's causing that problem. So I can't stress enough this is where the detail orientation for flying kestrels comes in. Since it had been 20 years since I had flown my last one, I had to get a pair of glasses because I couldn't see the bird's feet and feathers. If you have to do that, go ahead and do that, because it's impossible to fly one. It's impossible to stay on track with the details if you can't see the bird. So that's feathers. This is obviously kestrel on a bow perch. It's here in this part of the talk because this shows you the relationship between the husbandry and the feathers. This is really the ideal way to keep a kestrel. It cannot touch its feathers to anything else. It has a very short leash. The leash does not get hung up. Most kestrels will break feathers on the perch. And so if your husbandry with regard to how you tether the bird is perfect, then you're going to have very few problems with this. So that's the way to go. It answers a lot of questions with regard to how do you keep their feathers well. If they're fairly tame and they've got a good perch, you're going to be fine. All right, so feet. This is a big problem with kestrels, and we don't talk about it a lot. It's not a problem really with IS kestrels because they don't bait very much. But passage and haggard kestrels, a lot of them will bait even well into being trained and hunting. And frankly, a bird that baits, it doesn't matter, what kind of jess or how the jess is built. They're gonna injure their feet in some small way. And so here's a little example of how sort of jess-related damage to the tarsi looks. And so you see, sort of like a sunburn look, some redness, maybe a little red spot, and that's how it starts. So again, every day, every time you put the bird on the fist, lift those jesses up and take a look. And if you need glasses to do that, because this is how it starts, and it can go from here to a nightmare in 48 hours or 72 hours. So very important consideration. This is again this bird from the spring who did suffer a little bit here on the left leg. This is slightly greater progression in this, and you can see here on the left, the leg scales are separating a little bit, and you see kind of a bump in the left tarsi. This is, again, the next stage after this gets pretty severe, and unfortunately, I've seen it, and it's easier to avoid than it is to fix. So, and if it does get much worse than this, feeding the bird up and letting it go becomes a more important consideration. Here you can see this is right after treatment, and I'll show you what I treat it with, which I'm really happy with this stuff, and some of you may know about it already. Two little products here that work great in kind of in tandem. Liquid bandage, which is like a little, it's almost like a nail polish essentially. I think you could use it safely as a prophylactic. When you trap the kestrel, paint its legs with this stuff. Put a layer of it on there before you put the jesses on. And with this last one, I would reapply every other day. And certainly, if there was a new place that showed up a little scale that was maybe damaged or something that was getting irritated, I'd pop a little bit of that on it. It's therapeutic and it's also protective, and so those are important points. And then this wound gel is great stuff because it's a water based and it's antibacterial. The alternative would be to use like a triple antibiotic, and that stuff usually petroleum based, and it gets their feathers all matted. And you really to my point about the quality of the feathers has to be kept intact. And so you want something that's water based. And so these two products I really recommend that you have on hand before you get your kestrel. All right, this is the same bird before I let her go, all healed up here and here. Perfect little feet. And would say also that in addition to to keeping their tarsi healthy and their leg scales healthy, obviously keeping the talons sharp is essential for a kestrel. That's really all they've got. So that's absolutely the difference between catching and not catching with a kestrel, and especially something like a starling that they've got to hold on to. To that end, keeping their talons sharp, I use a short pile astroturf, and you can put it on everything. Certainly, all the perching surfaces that the bird touches. This has a kind of a rubber backing, and you can see sort of scale to my thumb how thick it is here. This is great stuff. Actually, picked this up after a conference I went to, and they had little faux putting greens on all of the tables, and so I just walked around after the conference and stole them all. So I got a pile of this stuff. All right, so this is again another perching arrangement picture, and it's here because it illustrates some important things about protecting the bird's feet. So the talons, you just cannot afford to have them get dull, because there's really no way to sharpen them except let the bird bathe or douse its feet with spray bottle, and sort of speed the process up that way. But it's better to keep them sharp to begin with. Here, the bird is obviously sitting on a good substrate, and when it baits, it's baiting onto a long pile like a welcome mat, which really works great also. And I've doubled over this little floor mat, so there's actually a little bounce. So fairly short leash, bounces onto this, zero damage to the tarsi or to the bottom of the feet, or to the talons. So something like this, it's the result of trial and error, which I should say here at this point. With a kestrel, you got to jump on stuff immediately. So if there's anything that's not right, it can't wait. It can't wait a day, right? It can't really wait an hour. If the bird's baiting, you can't let it bait for an hour. It'll just destroy itself. So everything that you do, you've got to go ahead and change it out. Change out the jesses, change out the leash, change out the perch, make a new perch. If you've got to do some significant re-engineering over the course of a day, do it. It'll pay off in the end. Food. This is really simple. Whole small animals. That's what they eat. All right. So you got to feed them that. Worst option, and it's not a bad option. Frozen lab mice. Fine, but they really do need fresh kills. And if you've got stocked in with good mice for the training, then it'll be feeding itself pretty quick. But the nice thing about kestrels is that they keep themselves in good food, and fresh. So the heads of everything that they catch, fresh. During the hunting season, mine. I'm letting somebody else in. There we go. Mine eat 100%, whole small animals that they catch, and yours can too. I mean, you should be able to catch something every day. So. So that's all there is to say about food. If it isn't on this screen, don't feed it to the kestrel. Furniture. Again, another conversation that can go on and on, especially with small hawks in general, because the detail orientation so important. There's really very little margin for error. This, if you have American Kestrels and Modern Falconry, you'll recognize this Jess pattern. There's no grommet here. It just folds over into itself and locks, and then the Jess comes through. This has worked well for me. A lot of people are using little eyelet snaps now, and they like that, and that's fine. Kestrels tend to bite at their jesses. The wild ones do, not so much the ISs, but the passage and haggard birds may never stop biting at their jesses, frankly. So if you've got some metal around their ankle, it could be a problem with their beak. So I avoid that. Plus, I don't want the little sharp edge anywhere near their feet. So that's the reason why I go with the one that doesn't have any metal next to it. So this is a hookup. This is a Colson style Jess extender, and I've used these with my larger hawks forever, learning it from Tom and Jen Colson, who have used it for 40 years before me. You can scale them down to kestrel size. They're very handy to have. It consists of two lanyard hooks, two small ball bearing swivels, a little tiny split ring, and then a slightly larger ball bearing swivel at the end. If you'll notice, the open end of the barrel is down. So that's an important point whenever you're using swivels with a kestrel or any small falcon in particular, because they mute straight down. They'll mute often onto their equipment. And so you want this open end of the barrel to be downward so that it's less likely to be soiled and get hung up. Again, because if the swivel is not working, the jesses are not, the jesses can get tangled. If the jesses get tangled, the bird can hurt its foot, it can break a feather, and it can happen in 15 minutes while you're on the other side of the house. So everything needs to work well. This is the way I hooked up this kestrel, which sort of shows the convenience of this system. You can have first of all, a glove. I usually take the fingers out of my gloves for kestrels, just because I need something for them to sit on, but you don't really need the rest of the glove. So a little glove as possible is helpful. And here you can attach another swivel and a larger hook, for example, so that you can, when you pick up the bird off the perch, just clip it into your glove. And this one precaution will save you a lot of heartache. And whether you do it this way or you have a little alligator clip to hold on to the Jess or to hold on to, say, a starling leg so that it doesn't get pulled out of your hand, is going to save you in the long run. So I recommend some sort of little clip system attached to your glove. This is one example of a way to tether a bird. This is a trapezoid style perch here. And essentially the leash is passed through this swivel at the end of the hookup, and then it's tied directly to the top. And so the bird has this much leash to jump down onto whatever you've got it down. It clears the tail on a bait. You don't need much leash. If you're putting the bird in a small place, like on a shelf, or as this one was at my elbow at my office, you don't want it to be able to fly very far. So this is one way to attach the bird to a perch. This is obviously another way. It still uses the hookup, and you can see on the bow perch that there's a permanent leash, a very small permanent leash attached to the bow perch with a swivel and a clip. And that stays on all the time. And then when you put the bird on the perch, you just clip it in. And so you're really reducing the number of variables that you have to deal with. Very important. So we'll talk a little bit about different perches. This is obviously a bow perch. It's the best way if a kestrel will sit on one and use it. It's the safest arrangement you can have. It's got a large, lightweight split ring for a ring. It's about a 3-inch ring. Very short, stiff. Let me go back. Short, stiff leash, and then a similar 2 little lanyard hooks and 2 swivels. So this I used for years, just like this, without any difficulty at all. I use a couple of different kinds of perches now because you'll find kestrels that need to be elevated, or kestrels that like one perch over another. And frankly, at this stage, I'd much rather find the right perch for the right kestrel than try to make a kestrel sit somewhere it doesn't want to sit. This is the same arrangement except with a permanent leash. And this bird, since she was in the corner, would just bait in one direction. So I put the mat in front of her, and she never needed to go to the other side. So again, in the interest of reducing variables, you want to, this system worked out well. This is on the ground in my office. This is the trapezoid perch. This is essentially a wooden base that's sort of rectangular, and then you slope the sides. You can either mold the top, as this, my friend, a carpenter, built this for me, or you can just use a dowel and screw the dowel into the top. This has got some advantages because you can see it's got a large ring. If you tie the bird to that ring and it baits, the leash does not go up through the tail. So that's the main advantage of a perch this type. It also serves as kind of a screen perch. The birds like it. They don't jump down behind it. It gives them, quite a bit of surface area to walk back and forth on, to turn around on. Not as good as a bow perch, but again, if the bird's tame and it likes to sit, then this is a great convenient perch to have. This is a pole perch. This is made by Eric Edwards, my friend in Florida, and he sells these. So you can find Eric on Facebook. Again, his name is Eric Edwards, and this is modular. So these all components all come together. All you have to do is buy a bucket and fill it with some Quikrete cement. The leash is passed through the top, and you pull it out of this hole, and it's got a little cleat right here that holds the leash. And then he sells a couple of extra tops. So if it gets soiled by the bird's mutes, you just switch the top out. This is a great system. He uses it for merlins. I have not used it a lot for kestrels, just because, again, I prefer the bow perch. But CC seemed to like this one, and it takes up zero space. So literally, you can put it in the corner of a room, and if the bird will sit on it again, all the better. This is a pretty convenient scenario at the house, especially for a bird that likes to be elevated. It's just a card table with the bow perch on it. The different perching substrates here that they would bait on, again, an idea from Eric that he uses with his merlins that I really like a lot for any small falcon. Wherever it baits, it's gonna bait onto something soft and that won't get tangled. That protects the feet, and with a little bit of variety there, you don't have to worry about any sort of repetitive kind of stress injury. A lot of kestrels, really, when they're relaxing, would like to be up like this, so it's an option. Plus, it's space saving. I should say here that keeping a kestrel indoors, a hunting kestrel, is essential in my view. Even here in the South, where it's warm outside and we have mild winters, it would be impossible, in my view, to keep a bird on weight, sufficiently to hunt with if it were outside in any way. Okay, so boxes. We're spending a little more time on furniture than I would, with other birds. But again, the details are important with a kestrel. So this is the style of box that I use. This box has been modified a little bit, but it's the same one in American Kestrels and Modern Falconry with the sort of guillotine style sliding door. This is actually just a PVC floor tile that I cut into the shape, and some corner round on front to make the slot that it slides into. Very convenient, because if you're putting a bird into the box that is new, you can lower it down over your wrist. And so the bird really has no way to bolt out as it does when the door is like ajar in a typical sort of arrangement. Tried this year, which I really liked, and this was an alternative with some slats in it, and it turned out that I think some birds would like to travel this way. This my hawk didn't, but she loved to sleep in it. I usually let kestrels sleep in their boxes at night. It slows the weight loss, and as a cavity nester, they really do like to be inside something at night. Every one of my kestrels, once they started sleeping in their boxes, you could just open the box at night and they would fly in. And this one, even though a haggard, almost immediately started doing that. She really loved it. This is her at night. Go and check on her before I went to bed. She's got her foot up. got great ventilation because this door, obviously is open, but if she can't get out of it. So if she wakes up before you do in the morning, you're not gonna find her on the curtain rod. And then this, we built a little caddy for this door that fits on the back of the box, and so we could switch it out with the solid. So a good system there. And I'll share the design with anybody who wants afterwards. Okay, so here we are at recall. And again, recall, one of the 4 fundamentals starts with, can you get the bird back? But it doesn't end there. It really describes how well the bird understands what's going on and how much attention the bird is giving you. And essentially, you want the bird's attention all the time. And with a small hawk, the more important it is. The smaller the hawk, the more important that is. All positive reinforcement, all of it coming to you, not you going to it. And you let the bird make the decisions, but you set up the scenario so that the right decision is the one the bird makes. And it's an approach, it's a philosophy, good recall, that is really important with a small hawk, in my view, with all hawks, but again, the smaller the better. So it's a little bit difficult to explain. In 4 Falconry Fundamentals, I spent some time on it, some pages on it, and I hope it's clear in there what I mean. It's essentially a measure of your control over the bird and its expectation of having good positive reinforcement. It's the partnership. It's a measure of the partnership. Some of the things we'll watch in this video, I've got it. You may have seen it before. We posted it to the Facebook page. I started a little bit later in here so you can see how that good recall is started in training. Hopefully it'll work. So this is first night. This is a couple of days later. You can see here, critically, you're not calling the bird to a piece of meat that's already on the fist. You start them out, calling them to the fist. Once they're coming, and maybe it takes a piece of meat to get it to do that, but as soon as you can, you call them to the fist bare, and then feed them out of your right hand. This is you'll see how important this is later on. Introducing the lure is is pretty simple. Lure does not have to be any special. I made this in 5 minutes with some spare leather and some zip ties. They'll learn anything as a lure, but essentially it's just taking tidbits off and then more tidbits from your finger. And you can see the bird is always looking at you. And this is, fundamental to good recall, is that the bird is, you always have its attention. This is sort of classic, stages of training, short flights outdoors, longer flights. You can see she's not coming into a tidbit. She's just coming in when she's called and then given a tidbit. And here, this is the first day she was flown free to the lure. So I'm probably terrified at this point because everything that I've done to this point has to work. And so, making in cautiously with a tidbit, whistling, watching her while she grabs a tidbit, making sure that that I've got her attention and she's got she's not looking to bolt. I would say here and generally say that that a bird, whatever it does on the lure is what it's going to do in falconry. It's going to do that on game. So you have to watch out for that. Another example of good recall. This is I guess about day 9. And every time you walk up to her, she just hops to the fist. You can see she's still bowing, which is a little bit of agitation for a kestrel. But she it's reflexive to jump to the fist, and that's how you want them, always coming to you. I use a lot of vocalizations, but the whistle and the tidbit combination is really key. All right, so here we are in recall and weight management. I guess at this point, I've been talking for a while. Want to make sure everybody is still there. Everybody can hear me. Maybe Mark,
Yep.
somebody send me a chat.
Yep.
We all good?
We got you. We got you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so look, weight management. I make the point not to call it weight control because you don't really control it. It's a living animal. There's 1,000 variables involved. If you can manage it, you're doing very well. And so weight management is about as good as you're going to get. That said, you can be pretty precise with a kestrel, really with any hawk, and you should be, and that should be your goal, is to be as precise as possible and as regular as possible. With a kestrel, I start here with the scale because this is a triple beam balance from Ohaus. It should be familiar to most of you. This is the dialogram version, so it's really super easy. You basically just have the bird literally dialed in, and it just makes the whole process quick. They're accurate. They're reliable. I like them a lot.
Hey, Matt, can I ask a question here?
Sure.
When you, and you probably have in your book, and I read it like a year ago now, but once you've gone through the process and you get them the recall and you've had them about a week or two, how many times per day do you weigh your kestrels? What's a good habit?
Yeah, well, I'm just about ready to talk to that right now. So yeah, good question, Brett. Weight management has one basic premise, and that is that metabolism burns weight. Okay, so the bird, as it's breathing and living and pooping and eating, it's metabolizing. That metabolism can be measured in the amount of weight it drops, and that's the whole ball of wax, basically. So how often do you weigh? You weigh a lot to begin with. Essentially, what you're trying to do is get an accurate measure of how many grams per hour the bird loses. This, you've looked at this little silly logo I've made from this process. The motto is I don't even know if it's the right Latin, but I looked it up on Google. It basically means measure more, guess less. That's the key to my falconry. Measure a lot, and guess as little as possible. So initially, you could be weighing every hour or every 2 hours. In practice, at least 3 times a day. Certainly, you need to be able to answer these questions. This is the actual data sheet from Cece, this bird this spring, from the day I got her, 9 February, to the day that she caught her first starling, which was 8 March. So 4 Sundays later, she caught her first bird. She was trapped. Let me go through these columns here. So the date, essential, and you can set this up. I can share this with anybody who wants it. The date, the first weight in the morning, and again, this if you fly in the afternoon, you flip these things around. But at this time, I was flying in the afternoon, so I take a weight in the morning. How many grams they burn overnight, something to measure. How much extra food you give them during the daytime. The afternoon flight weight, so this would be at the time that you're taking it out to hunt or to train. How many grams it burned during the daytime, what you fed it up to. These, total grams fed per day, percent trapped weight dropped, average over 23 hours. It's a lot of information to digest, but essentially it's Harry McElroy's 22-hour weight control system. So if you've read any desert hawking books, also Tom and Jen Colson's work, a lot of great falconers use McElroy's 22-hour system. And in a nutshell, both in the Kestrel book and also in 4 Falconry Fundamentals, I go into it in detail. But in a nutshell, you're flying a bird, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at a certain weight. By 6 o'clock, so those 2 hours are the hunting hours. By 6 o'clock, you feed it up to a weight that will have it back at 4 o'clock the next day to the weight at which it was today. So those are 22 hours between 6 and 4 the next day, and that's where it comes from. So so this implies that we know what the fed weight is, right? That the fed weight is a certain concept, and that's And that's what it goes to bed on, that weight that you fed it up to. And ideally, that should carry it over until hunting time the next day to have it right back at exactly the same weight. Difference in weight between day to day as you're dropping the weight for training or raising the weight later should be no more than 1% of the bird's body weight. So so for a 100-gram kestrel, obviously that's a gram. And again, that's the gold standard. In practice, things are kind of all over the map, especially during the first 2 weeks, where you're dealing with a lot of water weight. You're dealing with the bird that's stressed. You're dealing with, its metabolism will be higher. It has more food to burn. It has more fat to burn, so the weight drop is greater typically. Things start to even out about the 3rd week, and then generally by the first kill, you're very much on the road to where you know exactly what weight it hunts at best, exactly what weight to feed it up to, and pretty much within a 1 or 2 tenths of a gram where it's going to be the next day. Obviously, you may want to feed it a little bit during the daytime just to get it to where it needs to be. If you have measured well and regularly, you will know how many grams per hour it drops. And so between, say, noon and 4 o'clock when you hunt it, you'll know that it's going to drop, 2 grams. So it should be 2 grams heavier than hunting weight at noon, right? That's essentially what all of this represents. And to the extent that you can make this as much of a science as possible, it's useful. And to the extent to which you can always remember that it's an art, it is also useful. Here, anytime you have the bird's weight down, and here it's like 83% of its trapped weight. So, in a lot of the falconry books, we talk about, well, you don't want to drop it more than 10% of its trapped weight. That's a good ballpark. It doesn't work for any type of wild hawk, that I'm aware of, except, a merlin, which sometimes you can fly merlins heavier than what you trap them at. But for red tails and kestrels and most things, you're going to have to drop them a little bit more than that. This bird hunted at 16, 17% off of its trapped weight. Kestrels, in my view, much like prairie falcons, have a capacity to put on a lot of weight. So if you trap a fat kestrel, it's fatter than it needs to be, in the sense that that it can be perfectly healthy, leaner than that. But they put on a lot of weight quickly, and they hold weight well. I think it's a metabolic strategy. Yeah. Okay. So Raymond, I will share the spreadsheet for sure. Okay. So this is, this went on, obviously through the time that I flew her, and these numbers got much more regular. She flew about, 101 grams, a little bit lighter, flight weight, 96, and then caught most around there. Let's move forward. All right, so this is what that weight loss looks like graphed, and here's some interesting things to look at. This is the first morning weight. So one line first in the morning. This is the flight weight. So obviously you've got a difference between the weight at which you put it to bed, the fed to weight, and the weight at which it is at flight weight the next morning. And so, this difference between, say, 104 here at training time on the 21st to, maybe 100, 17 probably. So this difference here is what they burned over those 22 hours. And what you want to see towards, you can start to see it normalize here after about 3 weeks. And certainly once you start hunting, it should be fairly normal, where you're fed up to the certain weight, it's back down to a certain weight in the morning. If you need to feed it a couple of grams or a gram, you'll know you'll be hitting on weight in the afternoon. That's why, that's why I measure things. That's why I'm a little bit, geeked out on this weight control, because it helps me realize that I'm getting into the right zone. So obviously you can do too much of this. You can spend more time doing this than hunting, which I never would do, but it is useful to look at and to share the concept. All right, this is a percent of fat weight at flying time daily. So the thing to learn from this chart is that, you know, you start out 100% of its fat weight. And when I trapped Cece, she was fat. You couldn't feel a keel on her. She was perfectly round. She was obviously higher than she needs to be to, you know, to maintain her weight. And I'm sure, you know, that's exactly where she is right now, and where she wants to be is, you know, 100% or more of wherever she was. They want to eat as much as they can. As a practical matter, obviously they don't hunt at this very well in falconry. So this is basically the training time right here, where you're having to drop quite a bit to begin with, but there's a lot to drop to begin with. So this is not too alarming. You start dropping less. The dips become more shallow as you get closer to the bird being trained. And then, you know, right about here, on day 18 or so, we're cooking along pretty good, and actually, you know, end up raising the weight a little bit after that. This is the whole career of this bird, which, you know, I only flew her for a couple of months, 10 hunts and 10 birds, and by then I realized that she was not going to calm down, and she would continue to bait, which would just be a management problem for her and for me. I liked her a lot. She was a great hunter. She really never missed. Had she been tame, I'd still have her right now, but she just, you know, about an hour after being fed, if you didn't put her to bed, she'd be baiting on her perch. And when you have a hawk like that, and you've had one before, you never really want to see that again. You really want the ones that thrive in captivity. But she served her purpose, and part of the purpose was for me to be able to illustrate what this curve looks like. So here on the left, obviously, is the day of trapping, 100% of trapped weight. Here from about day, you know, 26 to day, to 20 March, from 26 February, you know, she's hunting all throughout here. And then deciding to let her go, you know, raising the weight. And you know, you don't want to overfeed a kestrel, especially at hunting weight, because they're susceptible to the sour crop. But she was never really that low in my view. And I was able to feed her quite a bit. And then after the second day of starting to feed her up, I was feeding her up twice a day. So she raised weight quite quickly. And then within a week, she was over what I had trapped her at, and she wouldn't drop below that. So I knew it was stable. You don't want to let one go just after a big feeding. You want to give it a week or 2 weeks of, you know, of feeding, so that weight is stable at the high weight. So that's what it looks like, a whole career of a kestrel from start to finish. And so, you know, your numbers will vary, but that shape will be the same. So just keep that in mind. All right, so this is a slip management. This is the last part. This is where everything kind of, you know, is pulled together. This is where you have a trained hawk, and you've done everything right up to this point, and you know what kind of game you're going after, and now you're trying to, you know, find it and give yourself some advantage. I would say that with a kestrel, slipping from the car window is it's really what they love to do. They do it very well. I mean, there's almost nothing better than a kestrel at it. It's not available as an option everywhere in every state. I believe Texas it is, certainly is in Louisiana. If you're hunting starlings and house sparrows, which are non-native species, and you're on private property and have permission, it seems hard to imagine that there's anything to stop you from doing it. But could only recommend that you be careful with this, and certainly in terms of hunting game species, this is not an option anywhere in the country, as far as I know. But so starlings out the window. We'll just start here, or in this case, cowbirds. So I wanted to drive around this week and find some good slips, birds feeding, but didn't have time, and the only time I had was out at noon. And you'll learn, you know, that noon is not a great time to find birds feeding on the ground. It's a phenomenon of early mornings and evenings. But having pictures of Cece on various kills, I knew where, or could remember where she caught them, so I drove back. This was her first catch, a cowbird, which is not a fantastic choice because they don't weigh any more than house sparrows, and she had never caught anything with me. It was certainly plausible that she would carry, and I would rather have caught a starling. There were starlings in this group, and so if we can see that, I'm doing a little animation here. This is I'm trying to illustrate here a good setup, and if you're familiar with car hawking, then this will not be new to you, but it's a stalling point to a lot of falconers with kestrels because they don't know how the setup works. So essentially, you've got a long, straight, private road that you're not going to be involved in traffic or have anything to distract you. You've got birds feeding on short grass to your left, fairly close to the road, maybe 15 feet, 20 feet. Here there was a mixed flock of starlings and cowbirds about that far from the road. This tree, this little bush here, hedge, whatever it is important because it has some open space underneath it. And I look for that, in this case, like to see it, because if she had carried something, it's likely she would carry it under there, and rather than over the fence and beyond. Of course, you never know, and you don't know until you do it. And so if you're not willing to accept a little risk, you're never going to catch anything. But this was the first hunt and the first slip, and there it was. And so it turns out she let me make in. It was a little dicey, but it was fine once I started whistling and picked her right up. So these are things to look out for. Long, straight grass, nothing dangerous behind. You want to think about not just what happens if she catches. You want to think about what happens if she misses. Is she going to chase it? If she catches, is she going to carry it? Where is she going to carry it? These are important. They shouldn't stop you from hunting, but they should always be on your mind. This is another scenario, another cowbird here, incidentally, but here's a pretty typical scenario, kind of a park-like campus, parking lot scenario on a Sunday morning. No cars, no traffic, fairly safe. There were birds under this little live oak here, and so key to managing a slip in this way, from the car at a starling, for example, you want the bird to see the quarry out the front window. And this is, if you're taking notes, take that note. Seeing the bird out the front window is very important. Your kestrel should slick down and point, at the game. If the bird is looking at your face and is puffed out and is twittering or, is baiting at the seat or wants to get back in its box, it's not going to fly whatever you throw it out at. So it's very important that the bird, be slick down and looking at it. You're gonna, continue on as you drive. You're gonna switch the bird from the front window to the open side window, and you're obviously, not gonna stop driving, because if you stop, then the birds will take up off the ground. You're not going very fast, 5 to 10 miles an hour. Once you're right next to it, you slip, and you don't stop then either. You just keep rolling for a little bit, but this scenario is, as simple as it is, and seeming arbitrary in this sequence. This is how you do it, and it's really not much more complex than that. Obviously, later on you can come up with better slips, more challenging, but you don't want to challenge a new kestrel. You want to make it feel like it can catch everything, and this is, that's the way to do it. This is a little example. It's a terrible video, but it's the only one I have of her, because a friend of mine took it while we were out. But it gives you, a little idea of sort of how simple this is. Basically, there are starlings feeding in the clover here by the fence. We're going to drive by and slip the kestrel out the window. She basically sets her wings, and it's an ambush, essentially. She knew they were there. She saw them. She went immediately out after them. She caught one on the ground, and so I make in, coming in front of her. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Hold on to the starling, reward her, whistle, essentially control the situation, and then pick her up. But that's essentially how it works. obviously it's, it's a pretty facile way to hunt with the kestrel, but it's always successful. Branching out a little bit, showing you it's not always a beautiful, mountain view in kestrel world. You're going to spend some time around the dumpsters. This is, a place where you'll find house sparrows. Not a bad slip because if it carries a sparrow, it's just going to go around the dumpster and still sort of be pinned in here. Keeping an eye behind the Kmarts and the Walmarts and looking for little flocks of house sparrows is something that you ought to be doing right now, even before you get a bird. So not the most beautiful falconry, I have to say, but certainly close to everybody's house, which is convenient. This is a stack of packing pallets. I have it here because it's actually a pretty neat little scenario for a kestrel on house sparrows. House sparrows will pack into these and they'll spend a large part of their day in these, usually close to some feeding place or some place where they can take a dust bath. If they're scared, for example, by a kestrel going out the window, they'll fly into it. Kestrels, American kestrels, sort of uniquely very good on the ground. They run after prey. If you have a large enough group of packing pallets and a big enough group of sparrows, you can really just walk up to the packing pallets, slip the kestrel into one of the holes, and get 2 or 3 friends to kind of block the exits, and a kestrel will run them down in there. Then you got to pull her out, but they recognize immediately what a good advantage that is. So look for that. Same places that you would trap house sparrows if you're trapping them. These are kind of places that you want to think about for hunting. This is a little bit more of a typical falconry scenario that you would be, you recognize this slip. This is, kind of hunting a hedgerow. Again, it's fairly, letting somebody else into the meeting now. Still a very urban scenario. Obviously you'd want to do this on a Sunday morning, where you haven't got patrons walking into the restaurant, but often around these landscape hedges, house sparrows will spend the day there as a day roost. They'll be piled up on top. There'll be a bunch of them in there. So this area right here, could have 50, 60 sparrows, and you'll hear them and see them. If you see a dozen and you hear a bunch, there's a lot more in there. So it's a good place to know about. Essentially the strategy here, the slip, as it were, is set up by putting the kestrel up on top. You are making a miniature version of a duck slip for a large falcon, or a rabbit slip, with a red tail. Basically, you throw the kestrel up there, all the sparrows will immediately be alerted. They'll pack in. They'll be chittering their little alarm call, and then you can stand right here and just hit this side of the bush. Let me go back a little bit. Is Jonathan Milliken, who you all may know. Just kind of tap this side of the bush, and so that you don't scare them all out, and they'll start fluttering around in there, and then the kestrel will come down. And this is actually very successful setup. Plus, the kestrel, once it has a sparrow, it's already in cover, which is where it wants to be. So if it's a little bit dicey on the pickup, at least the bird's already in cover and isn't going to be tempted to carry it much further. So look for areas like this for urban hawking of sparrows. Out in the field, for example, for some blackbird slips, for rails, this is actually a great rail field that we're in here. That's Jonathan Milliken, one of your Texas falconry buddies, who's, in my opinion, fantastic hand with kestrels. He's flown a bunch of great ones, and he does, does very, very well with them in terms of hunting and also in management and husbandry, in my view. Here he's flying it off a T-perch. Essentially, we're walking through cover for birds, and the kestrel is up there waiting for the slip. Birds are flushing fairly close, like say, for example, along this line of higher weeds. Flights are fairly short. With the American kestrel, they'll go into cover after birds, which is really handy. The European kestrel doesn't really do that, in my experience, and other sort of falcons like merlins and red-necked falcons, sort of similar sized small falcons. typically don't like to go in cover. So you really get an advantage with a kestrel in the field in this way, because they'll follow a bird right into a bush and catch it inside. Just like flying a Harris hawk off the T-perch, if she misses, she came back, and in this case, caught a small bird and actually brought it back to the perch, which was pretty neat. Okay, so those are the 4 fundamentals, sort of illustrated in photos. A little bit of miscellaneous stuff. For example, making in. This is years ago, back in my heyday, in my 20s, making in on a kestrel that was large enough to carry starlings, and she would. So this is what it looked like every time I made in, regardless of how wet it was or what have you. She never got tame enough to do better than that. This is a CC from this spring, a similar deal, although she was much better about holding on to stuff and not carrying it. Essentially, you want to, once the slip is over, you have a bunch of choices to make there. As a small falcon fighting a starling, it's going to be calling every Cooper's hawk in the area, every red-shouldered hawk, every cat, every dog. The tussle on the ground and the starling's alarm call is going to call every predator around. So you want to be there quickly. You want to be as close as you possibly can. You don't want this first kill to be the first time you've ever made in on your bird, which is why the lure work is important. And so in this case, she was struggling with it and looking down, which is great. Walking up, I whistle a tidbit, give her, before this, was giving her little tidbits out of my bare right hand instead of, making in with a big carcass on the fist, which strangely for small falcons usually makes them flee. And I don't know why that is. With a hawk, they like to come to a big piece of meat. Little falcon, if you shove a big piece of meat in its face in your glove, it's likely to have the opposite effect. So you want to tidbit it out of your bare right hand and whistle. And then, since this was, one of the early kills, wanted to grab hold of that starling, make sure she didn't let it go. You make in from the front, right, if you can. So even if you have to walk around in a big circle while she's struggling, make sure that she's got control over it, and start whistling at her so that she is cued to feed and look down at the prey. And every time they look down, you can make in a little bit faster. You want to get in there, put your hands in there, put your hands on the starling, control it for her, kill the starling as quickly as possible, open it up for her, let her take a few bites, talk to her. You're basically trying to be your friend at this point. Never take your hands off the starling. You don't need to clip the bird in at this point. If she's eating the starling, she isn't going to go anywhere. So so you can actually lift them up, with the starling, as long as they're, still feeding. You can have a tiring on your hand and switch them over to that if you like. Basically you're doing everything slow. You're making, sort of regular movements. You're whistling and tidbitting the entire time, talking to them. You want those wings to be, in and the bird to be facing you. Essentially, you make it as painless and as friendly, an interaction as you can every time. And then certainly for the first 10, 15 kills, I like to feed them by the truck, walk them back, let them eat. I've got a little stool, maybe you don't want to be this precise about it, but I sit down with them, let them eat the whole head of the starling, down to the mandible, and let them dispose of it so that they're basically the glove is clean at this point. They haven't had a full crop, because you don't want to crop them up in the field, because you don't know, unless you have your scale there, you don't know what it weighs. So you're only going to feed it 5 or 6 grams of food, maybe like half a crop, half of its daily feed, in other words. And then if you just use the head, then when it's done, it feels like it's done, and it can it can disengage and hop back in the box and feel like it had a little successful hunt, which is kind of where you want to be. Then back at the house, you pop it on the scale, see how many grams it needs to beat a fed weight, right? Because it's the end of the hunt, and so you're looking at 22 hours until the next hunt. You feed it to that fed weight on the scale, so that you can get right down to the 1/10 of a gram on that weight, and you record it, because you've got your notes right next to the scale. So that's kind of the whole cycle of get it to hunting weight in the morning, go hunting with it, make it as, peaceful a process as you can, as satisfying to the bird, take it back, feed it up, and then you're good to go the next day. And a kestrel can be kept like that indefinitely. So at hunting weight every single day for its entire life through the molt, if you like, and they do fine. This is sort of beyond the fundamentals, obviously trapping, and may or may not be useful to you, but I thought it might be interesting. This is the bolshatry that I use. It's obviously easily made. It's about a foot square hardware cloth, very low. It's not very big. You can see my hand behind it. Not very tall, because with the mouse or the sparrow running around in it, you want the kestrel to feel like he's very close, and so this is pretty useful design. It's not much higher than a quarter, basically, a third larger than the mouse, and then the noose is a little bit larger than a quarter, and this is pretty light line, maybe 7-pound test or 10-pound test, probably 7. Something that you should have and is useful is a little box that's the same size as the bolshatry, and this you can just slide it in. It keeps the nooses from getting tangled while you're driving around looking, and it also makes the mouse feel a little bit more at home, and gives you a little bit longer lifespan on your trapping bait, so that's a handy thing to have. Just a couple of words about what to do in the first, couple of days. A lot of people will hood birds in general, and kestrels in particular. Kestrels are kind of hard to fit a hood to. I've got some hood patterns in the back of the kestrel book. A lot of good hood makers out there today. I've seen some beautiful, hoods for kestrels that seem to fit beautifully. I don't have anything against it, except that a lot of people will end up using the hood as a crutch, and basically they'll keep the bird hooded all the time, and it doesn't, then recall is really curtailed, because the bird, if it's hooded all the time, doesn't really have an opportunity. It's only learning when it can see you, right? So ideally you want the bird tame, and if you're doing anything that keeps it from getting tame, you're slowing the process down. So what I do instead is I basically take off 2 or 3 days, so take off a Friday, trap Friday morning, and then you got at least until Sunday night to man the bird. I set up a dark room. This is obviously my spare bedroom. If your spouse allows you to take over a room, you're off on the right foot. Good to have it dark so that you can turn off the lights. Always handy, when you're manning a hawk. And I just sit with it, right? So sit with it and read, and make sure you've got everything that you need right there in the room. Obviously, the scale is here. A little headlamp for checking on the bird at night, or if you need to take a look at the feed and your eyes don't work very well. Some water to give the bird water out of your fingertips. So I talk about that in the Kestrel book. It's a good way to sort of simulate tidbits without adding any calories to the bird. Plus, they need hydration. They're under stress. They're not eating much. You need to make sure they're hydrated. A little bit of hypoallergenic hand lotion, just a dab of that on each leg, or to keep the leather from getting stiff, is handy. Something to clean up after the bird, always a good idea. And then a little video here. This is probably the second day, but it shows how to how to handle it. You're doing everything at like 0 RPM, right? All your movements are slow. Let me go back to it. See if there we go. All right, so she's obviously very new, still sort of not trusting me, but just knowing the psychology of birds, you back it onto a perch, and moving slow. You're basically replicating all the things that you will do with the bird once it's trained. And like I say, obviously she's not trained at this point. She's fairly new, but by manipulating what you know about hawks, you can put them through the motions, and I recommend that you put them through the motions as much as they'll stand. And meanwhile, give them every opportunity to eat, to make progress. I talk a little bit about in For Falconry Fundamentals that there's no correct order to training a hawk. Every hawk is different. They're all individuals. You can make a lot of progress with some hawks in 1 or 2 or 3 different areas almost immediately, and then have to work on some. And then another hawk the next year that you have, it's exactly the reversed, and it speeds up in other areas. So would not recommend that you think I have to do step A and then step B and then step C, and that I can't progress from B to to D until I go through C. No, you do everything you possibly can initially, and then you let the bird guide you to how fast it wants to go. So I talk a little bit about this in the book, the new book, with the idea being that you keep in mind what a trained hawk looks like, what it acts like, what it does. You assume that the bird is a trained hawk, and you let it tell you which parts are not working, and you work on those parts. And that way, you don't slow the hawk down. If it knows how to sit on a perch, great. If it doesn't have to learn that, super. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. If it comes immediately to the fist, if it eats immediately, well, you don't need to spend the next 4 days feeding it on the fist. So the idea is you want to get it trained in hunting as quickly as possible, because it's only at the end of that process that real recall clicks in, where it really understands what the program is, and that's where you want it to be for long term. So that's the presentation. Welcome to entertain any questions you have, and see if I can. I don't know how to unmute everybody, but anybody unmute yourself if you like, if you've got any questions.
Hey, Matt, I got a question.
Okay, it's Brett?
Sorry, this is Michael.
Oh, Michael. Okay, sure.
Hey, I got your book a couple years ago. I actually started an apprenticeship a few years ago and was able to trap a bird and had a successful hunt. But I had to, life circumstances changed, and I had to put my apprenticeship on hold, and I just haven't got back into it since. And it's been a few years now. And one of my thoughts that I've been keeping myself from getting back into the sport is I want to be fair to the bird and do justice to the sport. And I don't want to try to dive back in if I really don't have all the time or resources. But I wanted to get your thoughts on what exactly I should be waiting for, or looking forward to, or looking for in knowing when I'm ready to get back into it. Like what types of hours do you think people should be working, or what types of things should they be looking for in their life when they know they can take it up again? I'm a young father. I got small kids, but they also enjoy outdoors and enjoy the activities and stuff too, and animal husbandry and stuff. So I don't know. I just want to get your insights on when you think it's good to get into it again, or get into it at all.
Well, it's a great question, and it's a question everybody, all falconers, really should ask themselves, maybe even on an annual basis, if they have enough time to do it. Of course, it's going to be different for everybody, right? One thing that's convenient about kestrels and sort of small hawks in particular is that the quarry is usually close to the house. That's usually abundant. The bird itself takes up very little room. Hunting is fairly straightforward. Does not require driving around the countryside and looking for duck slips. It's not something that you're not likely to lose the bird regularly and have to spend a lot of unplanned time looking for it. It's a convenient sort of lifestyle choice. And for years before we had kids, we lived in apartments, and I had a kestrel with me, and they just occupied a little corner of the house, or a pole perch or a screen perch, and were just part of the family. And it's very easy, especially with a kestrel, to go catch a starling and feed it up and bring it back, and you're back in half an hour or 45 minutes. So if you think you have that kind of time and you really feel like you want to dedicate to it, then go ahead and do it. You really don't need much more than that. Like up front, like I say, if I trap a kestrel, I'd want to have a few days dedicated time to man it. And if you have small children, well, those kids never stop, and so you'll have to figure out how to do it all at once. But once it gets rolling, and like I say, it's 3 or 4 weeks until you've got a well-trained, well-oiled little machine. After that, it's easy. After that, it's, hey, look, if you can get out at, say, 8 in the morning every morning for half an hour or 45 minutes, then that's plenty of time. Or in the evening, before supper, depending on, the time of year, then usually catching something is not that big a deal. So, obviously I can't answer it for everybody, but I would say that if you have, if you've got an hour a day, you've got enough time at minimum to get it done. Hope that helps. I got a question here from Clay. Why not trap a passage bird instead of a haggard? And I presume you mean why I keep CC as a haggard bird? And no good reason except probably greed. Bird in the hand. And she turned out pretty well. Within 3 days she was flying to me. So generally speaking, if they're impossible to work with early on in the first few days, you don't want to keep them. And some haggards do well, and some don't. But that is also true of passage birds. So some passage birds don't do well. Obviously, I think more of them will, get along early, but some of them don't, and you really can't know until you start to work with it. So the neat things about haggard birds. Obviously, it's got a long history of flying adult falcons. It's the only falcon that we really are allowed to do that with. You gain what I think I gained with CC, which was she absolutely knew exactly what to do. In fact, a week before I slipped her at her first bird, I just drove her around and showed her birds. And she, bobbed and slicked down, looking out the window as we were driving around. She already knew, exactly. And I knew just looking at her that she was going to take the first slip I gave her. And with an IS kestrel, for example, it may be, a lot of weeks and slips to get them to where they're confident like that. But a haggard bird, every haggard kestrel has caught a lot of birds. I mean, I don't think they make it through a winter without catching birds. So all of that factored in. Ultimately, I think that's why I let her go. She just never could settle down. She wanted to be outside all the time. And when you have a hawk that, that doesn't really thrive in captivity, it makes you feel bad. You don't want to keep a bird like that. So so the sooner you can tidy it up and let them go, the better. That's my answer there.
Hey Matt, this is Brad. I gotta just to follow up on your point. So red tail. A lot of the folks I hang around with are big red tail folks. So obviously you have to take a passage. So do I understand correctly? For kestrels, you can trap a haggard. Is that?
Yeah. You can because, and I think the regs were written this way originally because it's sort of difficult to tell a passage from a haggard, especially after November. And the reason for that is that kestrels actually go through a partial body molt their first year. So if you're trapping a bird in the spring, for example, and it's even possible, although I don't think it's the case with CC, you could have a bird that was born the previous spring, trapped the following spring, in adult plumage, even though it's just a year old, mostly adult plumage. And so just that factor alone made it, difficult to be able to tell one from the other. I think in practice with experience, you get a sense of, what you're dealing with there. And the males, I think it's a little bit easier to tell a young bird from an adult bird. But like I say, even the banding lab won't accept an age on a kestrel, I think, past November of every year. So you can't even claim it's a young bird because the variability in the molt is so great. So that's the reason for that. I think actually horned owls, you're allowed to catch an adult horned owl too, which I don't know why anybody would want to do that, but I think it's legal, and more power to you if you're that kind of falconer.
Yep. Okay. Hey, as a final question, actually I have more questions, but we'll just stick with this last one. I was talking to a falconer who had done kestrels, and one of their concerns was, or the concern they relayed to me was they found Kestrels a little nervous because of Coopers, and the individuals I was talking to, and I forgot who it was, but they said, every time he slipped it, he had to worry about Coopers,
Yeah.
and it seemed like they were everywhere.
Right.
So I'm in Texas, a lot of forest areas and the eastern section, stuff like that. So how bad, I guess my question is, how bad is it?
It's bad. It's bad. The answer is it's bad. And it's getting worse. I mean, like I say worse, I love Cooper's hawks and I'm glad that they're everywhere, but they are literally everywhere. When I got out of college, this was years ago, but even then, my first 3 years, I was working for the state of Florida, trapping Cooper's hawks and tracking them all day. Even then, in North Florida, they were every square mile was a pair in our study areas, and they're only more common now. I've actually had 2 of my kestrels caught by Cooper's hawks. One of them basically caught off the fist. I mean, she came into the fist, she looked up, screamed, bolted, made it about 6 feet away from me before the coot came over my shoulder and took her out of the air. Another one caught on the ground next to a fence. And I've heard several other people have also had the same experience. I would say quickly that both those birds escaped, and most of them actually do escape if you yell and scream and run after the Cooper's hawk. And this is, if you've flown a Cooper's hawk, you'll know they don't kill what they catch. Typically, their feet are gigantic, long, skinny toes. They wrap around the bird entirely, sometimes not even puncturing it, and they'll pluck it basically, alive. And unfortunately, at a trapping blind one time, we saw a wild coot catch a wild kestrel and take it into the palmettos, 60 yards away where we couldn't get it. And we just listened to the bird scream for 45 minutes while it was getting plucked to death.
I heard this story. Yeah, it sounds horrible.
It's horrible. But it indicates that essentially if you start running and screaming and yelling, they will let it go. And both those birds I got back with no injury. So don't panic, or do panic, but do the right thing when you panic. I also would add here that I think it's probably instinctive for kestrels not to want to fly near a dense wood edge. And so a lot of people will say, hey, look, she's coming indoors really well. She's coming in the backyard really well, but I took her out to a field, out to a ballpark or whatever, and she's not coming. And you talk to them a little bit, you find out that it's right next to a real dense wood edge, and the bird just won't come. And I think that they just don't like, flying near a real dense wood edge. And I wouldn't, even hunting one, you don't want to do that because the birds are always waiting there in the wings. Let me take a couple of questions here from the chat. Well, Mark mentions that the new regs are put in place, only take passage birds as kestrels. So good luck with that. You get one early, and some of them, like I say, are obviously passage birds and easier than others. But if you trap late in the season, it will be hard to tell one from the other. Michael asks, you're introducing a passage kestrel to starlings. What tips do you have for getting a mouse grasshopper killer entered to starlings, and how do you introduce baggies? So Cece was not bagged on anything. I knew when I drove her around and she started bobbing and slicking down at starlings feeding on the ground, I knew that she would take a slit. She knew exactly what it was, and it would be up to me to give her a good slit, but just, chunking her out the window when she was slicked down was going to be enough. And sure enough, the first bird I threw her at, she caught. Obviously not all of them are going to be that way, but I think that, if you're against baggies, which I think, we should all be a little bit against baggies, just because if it would be possible to hunt without one or to enter a hawk without one, it would be better. Generally speaking, if you've got enough prey base and your bird's recall is good, then you should be able to just put it in front of game and catch something. But a baggie can be, if you do use one, shouldn't take more than one, because essentially what you're teaching them is not how to hunt birds, right? You're teaching them to slip, and to that end, I had another haggard bird that I entered on a mouse. Basically, just put the mouse out in the grass and showed her the mouse out the front window, and as I drove past, out the side window in the same little sequence we went through, and went out and caught the mouse. And it was the setup. The next day she went out and caught a sparrow. So It's the setup. Just remember, it's the slip. It's not the quarry that they're really keying on. And so you could do it with a lure. You could do it with a carcass, a dead starling that you have a buddy throw out, out the window. You could shoot a bird off a wire, a starling off a wire with a BB gun, and slip them out while it's on the ground. It doesn't have to be, a big involved process. And like I say, for me, aesthetically, if I could get away with not using baggies, I will. Certainly, even if a kestrel has never caught anything with a backbone, if it sees a mouse or a bird flopping on the ground, it's going to go get it. If it doesn't go get it, it's not at weight. They really are. They're little hunting birds, and just like a red tail will go eat a cotton rat, kestrel will go get a sparrow. Okay, so and I don't mean to make entering sound super easy, but it really should not be a long process. Sarah asks, what would you say the danger drop zone is on a kestrel weight? Well, once they're at weight, which the best indicator of before you start hunting weight is what they catch game at, right? So that's literally hunting weight. Flying weight, before they hunt, because it comes to you when you call it. And if your recall is good, you ought to be in a field like in the picture in this screen right now. If she's or if he's over here by the light post and you're standing on this tarmac and you raise your fist, they ought to be coming. They ought to be coming when you look at them. Or they ought to be coming when they're when you yell at them. Certainly when you swing the lure, they ought to be coming. At that weight, that's within a gram or two of their hunting weight. When you get that good response from as far away as you can see them, that's it. And you don't want to go any further down than you have to. Really, they're not going to starve to death if you take them down three grams below that, but you ought to be worried. And I would say that one of the indicators that you can look at is this grams per hour loss. So you're recording all this on your Excel spreadsheet, or at least your notebook next to the scale, and how how many grams per hour it loses. And if you read in the Kestrel book, I go into this with more detail, but a hunting kestrel at hunting weight, male or female, will drop about 0.5 gram an hour over 22 hours. And so if it's burning, a gram an hour, it's too low, right? Or if it, they'll burn a lot when they're at the high end of their weight because they've got a lot more weight to burn. But if they're at hunting weight and they're burning a gram an hour, it's too much. Their weight is really too low. You need to pick them up a little bit more. You want them, every day to be at about 0.5 gram an hour, 0.4 grams, 0.6 grams, 0.5 grams, about that. And so that's your best measure. James asks, do you ever fly your kestrels without jesses? I don't. I would like to, but it would be difficult for me to slip them without jesses, because I'm generally slipping out at starlings out the car window. You got them on the fist. You want to be able to control the slip, although kestrels are good about sitting tight until the right moment and then going on their own. It's handy to have them something you can hold on to. And also, when you're picking it up and in a good long hunt, you may have fed the bird 3 or 4 grams. And so now you're actually getting out of hunting weight. By the end of the hunt, maybe he's caught 2 or 3 starlings. You fed him the head of the first 2 and a couple of tidbits on the third. By the 4th slip, the bird's 3 grams up, 4 grams up. You want some jesses on that bird, when you walk it back to the car, because it's gonna bolt. A kestrel at hunting weight, if it's 4 grams over hunting weight, it's likely to bolt just, by you slip, maybe you trip a little bit on the way back to the car, or it sees a hawk or something happens. So I like to fly with jesses, but in theory, flying without jesses would be great. Audrey asks, you write in your recent book, many falconers being taught to train our hawks with entering and hunting as subjects later for consideration, right? When finally entered on game, are too focused on the falcon, unable and expected to hunt. So this is basically where I'm talking about the scenario where the birds are overtrained before they're entered. And she asks, number one, how do you know you're overtraining a bird, and how do you mitigate that? And number two, as to not have entering and hunting as subjects for later consideration, do you suggest introducing the lure early on? So first, first question, how do you know you're overtraining a bird, and how do you mitigate that? If the bird is coming to you across a field when you call it, and it comes to the lure and it comes to the fist, and you're not trying to hunt it or think about hunting it at that point, you're overtraining it. You can't do too much anti-carrying training. Practically speaking, you should do that every day, walking up to it on the lure, giving it tidbits and et cetera. But you don't have to do that in the absence of hunting. Once it's coming to you, once it's flying off the creans reliably, you should think about hunting it. So it's overtrained almost by definition if you're spending more time training than hunting and you don't have any trouble getting it back. Because every day that you spend training a bird that's already trained, it's getting more and more focused on you, and actually is not looking for game anymore. You're trying to thread the needle here with a bird that's wild, knows that when it's hungry, it needs to catch something to eat, something alive, and you want to not lose that by training it, right? You want to jump back on that train as soon as you can. And so all you're trying to teach it to do is come back to you, essentially. But you don't want to teach it so well that all it wants to do is come back to you. You want it looking out the window. You want it looking at other game. You want it, and that's a risk. And I think a lot of falconers, don't want to take that risk. But in falconry, you got to take risks, or you can't move to the next step. So I would say, yeah, you're overtraining it when it's coming great and you're not hunting. Number two, do I suggest introducing the lure early on? Yeah, so I introduced the lure indoors in that room, in that dark room, as soon as the bird is hopping the full length of the leash. If it's coming, if you can take it off the leash still safely without it, jumping up on the curtain rod and making you turn off the lights and try to grab it up again, which generally happens to me because I try to push the envelope a little fast if I can. But if it's coming across the room and you can drop the lure on the bed, start training it then. So that's usually day 3 or day 4 or day 5. And then you should treat the lure like game. So lure has a little tidbit on it. You just call it to it, repeatedly for the tidbit, pull it away a little bit, let it run after it, as you see in the video. And you can look at that video on YouTube and kind of see whistle and tidbit. Make sure that they're not possessive over the lure, but that they come to it immediately for food. And then as soon as you're outdoors, they'll recognize it. So yeah, so I guess as early as you can, but not earlier than it's coming to you across a room. Raymond asks, do you use GPS or other tracking device? I don't, and I never have, and I don't disagree that it's a good idea. I would be a little concerned, even though it's very small these days, they're still adding extra weight. Although for flying out the car window, the bird's only flying 20 feet, 30 feet, will probably not hinder you in terms of, success there. But, maybe it makes the difference trying to pull away from a Cooper's hawk at full speed. So, the neat thing about kestrels, unlike a merlin, for example, is that they rarely, continue the pursuit. If it misses, it generally just goes up and sits on a pole somewhere. I mean, you can lose them, and I've lost them, but the number of times they miss and just go sit on a building or a wire, that's 99.9% of the time. So you're almost not going to lose it while you hunt it. It might get chased off by crows. It might get eaten by a Cooper's hawk. It might possibly catch something and carry it, and you can't get it back, but you're almost certainly not going to lose it. Like, you'll know where it is. It's just not coming back to you. So of all the small hawks, it's the one that's probably easiest to fly without telemetry. The only additional thing I would say there is that when you don't have telemetry, you're better at the weight control. You really do have to pay more attention, and you force yourself to do that. Like you raise your threshold of comfort level, or lower it depending on how you want to work that metaphor. But you're more careful when there's no telemetry, and that's always helpful. let's see, Sarah asks, I've got a question about my bird's sear color. Yeah.
So I have read that the yellow sear comes from a more bird diet, and I have some more birds for him to eat now. But I'm actually wondering, why is it so pale? Like his comparatively toward with any other kestrel that I've worked with, he's just super, super pale.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that has anything to do with diet or genetics, or if it's anything I should probably watch out for, something like that.
Well, you can, so I think it's not so much bird in the diet, it's probably, you know, freshly killed small animals, the fat. The brain and the fat, you know, has that fat has the keratin in it, and the keratin is what makes their sear and their feet yellow.
Okay.
And probably there's, you know, certain insects that have a lot of that too, high fat insects. So you know, if you're feeding mostly you know, frozen lab animals, then probably you're not giving them that particular nutrient.
Okay.
And you can use a little, like my hairsock turns like day glow yellow as soon as I start giving them in the summertime chicken necks and some Vitahawk, which is, you know, basically got all the coloring in it. So I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, I'm looking at him right now. He looks, you know, happy, and his feathers are in great shape. I can tell you he's you know, from here he looks super. But he will color up the more, you know, the more wild kills you give him.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Michael Leavenworth asks, is there an advantage trapping late August, September passage bird over, say, late October, November passage bird? I'm not sure you'd be able to tell the difference, frankly. You could have a really wild bird, you know, trapped on its natal territory, you know, just as soon as it's penned, you know, genetically, you may have a real wild one, and then you may trap a real tame one, you know, in February. Generally speaking, the theory would go, the longer it stays wild, the wilder it gets, and maybe there's some truth to that, but I'm not sure that individual difference wouldn't override that. And I would say whatever time you can get your kestrel. Down here, there aren't any in August except local birds, and there aren't many local birds here in South Louisiana. So we have passage birds or wintering birds that come in. They usually don't come in until October. So there really isn't an option to get one earlier than that unless you're getting a local bird. And I would say, you know, then the rules are the same. If it comes around in 4 or 5 days, great, keep it. If it doesn't, then let it go regardless. The other theory that you might be thinking of is that, well, the longer you wait, the more chance it has to get experience catching birds. And I would say that you will give it the experience catching birds that it needs. I mean, there are, you know, imprint ISs that obviously have never caught a bird that end up being great, you know, bird hawks. So it's really up to you to give it good opportunity, and you don't have to worry about. I mean, you know, I think a wild bird is better than an IS bird because it knows how to fly, but it really doesn't have much to do with the hunting. So. Okay, Sarah says, what about bells? Never use bells. I would never use bells. You know, it's gonna, it's a hindrance around the feet. Most of your slips are ambushes, so you don't want to like alert the quarry to the kestrel coming at it. And like I say, you know, bells are only useful in 2 scenarios. One, when the bird is somewhere you can't find it, you can't see it, but you could hear it. And a bell that's small enough for a kestrel, you can't hear it at a distance. It would be, you know, where you couldn't see it. And generally speaking, you'll never have a kestrel where you can't see it because it wants to be found. It'll sit up on the highest thing it can find. So there's no, I can see no advantage to a bell at all. The other scenario, like with the Cooper's hawk, is that, you know, you have a neck bell because it in cover, it'll hide on the quarry. Kestrels never hide on the quarry. They start eating, you know. So, and generally speaking, this is where you're hunting, this big grass green here, and you know where it is. So I would say no.
I have another question as well. So this bird actually was, he was hanging out around the rehab center. They had just released him and he was still begging for food. So I got permission to come and take him and hopefully try to hunt with him. How do you actually like tell with a kestrel if it's imprinted or just heavily habituated? Because that's something I'm really nervous about with this guy.
Well, I mean, I'm not a trained animal behaviorist, and imprinting, has an official definition. I think the concept is quite a bit more fluid than we generally think about it as. I think you can have a haggard kestrel that acts like an imprint if it's so inclined, and you have habituated it to in a certain way. It can, in other words, it behaves as if it were a hand raised bird. It flutters its wings. It makes the food begging noise all the time. And you can have a hand raised bird that doesn't do that. And so you can also have a wild caught bird that will attempt to mate with you. If it's habituated in captivity for years. My Harris hawk, I could get it to be a sperm donor, even though it's an adult that was raised by other adults in a normal scenario, not imprint. In other words, I've just had him for 14 years, and so it's sort of hard to tell. I would say it's not even worth worrying about right now. I mean, I can tell you he's not a hard imprint, because if he'd be wouldn't be looking around, he'd be looking at you screaming right now. And at pretty much any weight. And so the question is sort of moot in that, probably you get him trained in hunting and he'll be a great hunter. And if you wanted to let him go after he, killed X number and you felt he was a good flyer, almost certainly would breed, with a wild kestrel. If he survived long enough, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay, cool.
So I have a separate question from the fundamentals and stuff. This is more about just something in my, business side of things. I want to get into, I'm an artist and illustrator, and I work in the animation industry, and I want to get into wildlife art, and illustrating for falconry books would be awesome. And I was wondering how you got in touch with your illustrator and kind of what suggestions you have for me being able to get in touch with, people that I can do covers for and whatnot.
Oh, sure. So the American Kestrel book is illustrated by Steve Hine, who's a falconer and a wildlife artist in Statesboro, Georgia. I've known Steve since I was in high school, and so that's how that contact was made. He was interested if I were writing a book that he wanted to illustrate it. So it was really no more complex than that. I would say the opportunity these days over the internet is great. I mean, on my Facebook feed, I've got half a dozen really good artists who I could reach out to and ask if they were interested in partnering on a project. So I don't think that finding somebody to work with is that hard from your perspective. If you're the artist and you're not writing the copy, then you need to find some writers, right? Like you need to put yourself out there to people who are trying to create content or have creative projects, and make sure you're in that realm. With For Falconry Fundamentals, the new one, I worked with a professional typesetter, an artist who does book layouts for a living. She works for the local university press, and I've worked with her professionally before. So she's just in my Rolodex, and I knew she'd do a good job to make the book look pretty and to take the photographs and put them in the right place and use the right font and have enough white space. I mean, she does all this stuff very well. So I wouldn't rely on myself to do that. I wanted the book to look good, and I just try to concentrate on the writing. And then so every project is a collaboration in that way. So I would just say find collaborators, find your little artistic community, and then make them an offer. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it offline if you like. Well, it looks like people are wrapping up and hopping off, and we're right at an hour here. So we're actually,
actually almost 2 hours.
Yeah,
2 hours.
that's great. Well, I appreciate everybody's attention, and I hope it was useful and not boring. I am available on Facebook and an email address, call me if you need to. Anybody who has bought either or both of the books, I thank you for that, and would encourage you to do it if you haven't. And I wish you all very good luck with your birds and great hawking season.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. I think we all learned a great deal.
Super.
All right.
Great.
Thanks.
Not a problem. All right, folks. Hey, thank you for attending. This has been very educational, I believe, for all of us. And keep an eye on the Facebook group. I'm sure Mark will be posting our next presentation for next month. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.